Okay, so this is the IXL BB8 solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Okay, so for each of these problems, what you have to do first is you have to factor, and then after you factor, you can solve. So example 1, solve x squared plus 30x equals 0. Now, one thing I always say is the first rule of factoring is to factor out the GCF. And the second rule of factoring is to factor out the GCF. Okay, so bottom line, always factor out a GCF first if there is one. This one has a GCF. The GCF is x. So you're going to factor out an x. And it's going to leave you with x plus 30. Because x times x is x squared, and x times 30 is 30x. Now you have two terms that are being multiplied by each other to get 0. You have x, that's a term, and then the x plus 30 in parentheses, that's a term. The only way to multiply to get 0 is for one of the factors to be 0. So either x equals 0 or x plus 30 equals 0. So x equals 0, that's one possible answer, and the other answer is x equals negative 30 when you solve that. Okay? Let's move on to example 2. Solve x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Whenever you have to factor, and you have a trinomial, which is 3 terms, which we have here, a trinomial, and the first term is just 1x squared. That's the easy, quick factoring ones, okay? So all you have to do is you need to find two numbers. So I'm going to say you need two numbers that multiply to negative 35 and add to negative 2. Multiply to negative 35, add to negative 2. So think about that for a minute. Those numbers are negative 7 and 5. Because negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2, and then negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. Now, that's not the final answer to the problem, remember. This is just the next step, okay? The next step is to factor. So we factor this. We get x minus 7 times x plus 5 equals 0. So all we did was we factored, okay? We got negative 7 and 5 when we factored. Now you're multiplying to get 0. The only way that's possible is if one of the factors is 0. So either x minus 7 equals 0 or x plus 5 equals 0. And solve each one. When you solve the one on the left, you get x equals 7. That's one answer. And when you solve the other equation, you get x equals negative 5. That's the other answer. Okay. Now let's do a more difficult problem. This one, you have a trinomial again, but the first term is not 1x squared. When the first term is 1x squared, you can do it the quick way, like example 2 that we just did. This one, it's not 1x squared, so you have to do it the long way. First, take the a value, which is that number right there, 3, and multiply it by the c value, which is 11. So that's the first step. 3 times 11 equals 33. Now you need to find two numbers. That multiply to the 33. And they have to add to this number right here. So they have to add to 34. So think about that for a minute. But the answer is going to be 1 and 33. So what you're going to do is you're going to replace 34x with these two numbers, with the x added on. So here's what I'm going to do for my next step. The 3x squared stays. Okay, 3x squared stays. You're going to replace the plus 34x up here with these two numbers. So I'm going to do plus x plus 33x. And now you're going to do factoring by grouping. So I'm going to group these two terms together, and I'll group these two terms together. Take out the GCF of each group. The first group has a GCF of x. That's going to leave you with, in parentheses, 3x plus 1. Because x times 3x is 3x squared, and x times 1 is x. The second group has a GCF of 11. So factor out the 11, it leaves you with 3x plus 1, because 11 times 3x is 33x, and 11 times 1 is 11. Now notice how the parentheses match? That should happen. So you factor out the parentheses to the front. So 3x plus 1 gets factored out to the front. And everything left over, in this case, x plus 11, comes in the second set of parentheses. And now you have to solve. You are multiplying two terms to get 0. So one of them has to be 0. That's the only way to multiply to get 0. So either 3x plus 1 equals 0, or x plus 11 equals 0. Solve each one. On the left, you get 3x equals negative 1, x equals negative 1/3. Just subtract 1 and divide by 3. X equals negative 1/3. On the right, you get x equals negative 11. And those are some common problems for solving a quadratic equation by factoring.